On to today's session. Juliana, if that's the correct pronunciation,
Yeah, you got it right.
implementing alternative accessible colors in Power BI reports. I haven't met you in person or online before, so I know very little about you. Would you care to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, I have a slide on that if I can just start sharing.
Yeah, so just a few, we will keep the chat open for questions. I will answer any questions that I can answer. Otherwise, we will collect them until the end of the session, where we will have a short Q&A for that. And I will be off camera, but I will be monitoring the chat, so the focus is on the presentation. Right, there you go. You can take over the screen.
So thanks a lot for joining today's session, implementing alternative accessible colors in Power BI reports. Before we dive into the content, let me briefly introduce myself. So my name is Juliana Smith. My background is in physical oceanography. So I started my career in data science and ocean research about 17 years ago. I had a few career changes. So I worked as a navigator after that for many years. And since 2020, I have specialized in Power BI. And for the past about 18 to 20 months, I have deep dived into user interface design as well as digital accessibility. I have a blog called Smart Frames UI and a YouTube channel called Accessible BI, where I share insights on Power BI, as well as how we can report on project data and accessible design, so accessible data design. I currently work as a reporting lead at Costain, which is a company here based in the UK, and also specializing in Power BI framework and development. For today's session, we're going to talk about why color choice matters, and they're going to understand a little bit more about accessibility, and then what is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is known for short as WCAG. I'm going to briefly talk about Power BI built-in accessibility features. And then we're going to have a couple of demos. One is selecting accessible colors, and the other one is creating an alternative view in Power BI. And then we're going to wrap up the session. So just before we start, this session I actually created based on an experience I had with a stakeholder who was colorblind. And I kind of replicated the visualization that I struggled. I didn't know that he was colorblind for 6 months. So let's get to know what happened and what we can do to prevent color accessibility issues. So first, I'm going to show you a few pictures, and I want you to think to yourself, what do you see? So we have here a basket full of fruits. So what fruits do you think are inside this basket? And then we have another basket with more fruits inside. What fruits can you see on this basket? And finally, we have our last basket with more fruits. So try to think, what fruits can you see in each one of them? Let's start now. So color in user interface design refers to the visual property that results from the interaction of light and the way that is perceived by our eyes. And it can be described using 3 concepts, which are in terms of hue, saturation, and lightness, where hue is what we commonly refer as color. So for example, red, blue, and green, and it represents the position of the color on the color wheel, which is represented here in degrees. We also have saturation, which measures the intensity or purity of the color. So a highly saturated color is vivid and intense, while if we desaturate the color, it will appear more muted or like grayish. And finally, we have lightness, which refers to the brightness or darkness of a color. And when we adjust the lightness, we can create shades when we make it darker, and we can create tints by making it lighter of the same color. So we can have multiple shades, for example, of red, as well as multiple tints. And when we adjust these 3 components, we can create a wide range of colors and tones. So something that's very important to understand as well when we start talking about choosing colors is what is vision. So vision is our special sense by which the qualities of an object, such as color, luminosity, shape, and size, are perceived And this process involves the light rays entering our eyes, being transformed by the retina into electrical signals, and then these signals are transmitted to the brain via the optical nerve. In our retina, we have two types of photoreceptor cells. We have cones and rods. So cones are responsible for color vision. So they function best in bright light conditions, and they help us differentiating colors. There are three types of cones. One helps us to see red, the other one allows us to see green, and the last one that allows us to see blue. And then we have rods. So rods are actually responsible for vision in low light condition or night vision, and also in detecting movement. So rod cells do not influence on how we differentiate colors. They don't have that function. So now we can talk about how we use colors. So in user interface design, or when we are creating any digital interface, color can be used for various reasons. So color is really good to convey information. So different colors can signal different actions or statuses. So for example, red it's very commonly used for arrows, and green for success. Color can also help us building visual hierarchy. So it helping guiding our users' eyes to the most important elements first. And of course, colors can help us enhancing aesthetics. So it can make a design more visually appealing and engaging. And finally, color also evoke emotions. They can set the tone or the mood of an interface. So something that's quite common is blue for calmness and yellow for cheerfulness. And that's why when we are designing data visualizations, dashboards, or reports, it is extremely important to consider those who are not able to see the difference between certain colors. So there are approximately 350 million people around the world who experience some form of color blindness. So it's about 1 in every 12 males and 1 in every 200 females. And color blindness is the inability to see the difference between certain colors, and it occurs due to the absence or malfunction of the cone, so the photoreceptor cell that we have in our retina. And additionally to general low vision and color blindness, there are other common conditions that also affect our ability to see colors, and that includes glaucoma and cataracts. So the ability to differentiate certain colors, certain hues, will depend on the color contrast ratio, and that's where digital accessibility plays an important role. So if you remember the baskets we have, with the three different baskets we have with fruit. So the three of them was color blindness simulation for this last one on the right. So the first one shows red color blindness, green, and the second one green color blindness, and then we have blue color blindness. So it's important to understand that color blindness, you can see some, so there are some degrees. So it's kind of when your cell malfunction, so you can see some red, for example, and the extreme case is you don't see any red. And it's with these extreme case, so you cannot see any red, any green, or any blue, that we're going to work on the sessions for our simulations. So what is digital accessibility? I think it's easy to understand as digital accessibility focus on making websites, apps, and other digital experiences usable for all users, regardless of abilities, disabilities, and circumstances, because sometimes the circumstance that we are may affect how we interact with digital interfaces. And this means that users should be able to perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with digital interfaces without facing any barriers. So a little bit more of stats. According to the World Health Organization, there are at least 2.2 billion people globally with some form of vision impairment, which accounts for about 27% of the global population. And when I talk about vision impairment, it's not only color blindness. So that's why it's really important to optimize our color palettes for people who have any sight impairments, so that we can ensure actionable opportunities for our users. And for that, we need to understand the concept of accessible colors. So very simple. Accessible colors are color combinations that have enough contrast to make text, icons, and other elements easily distinguishable from the background and between themselves as well for people with visual or color vision impairment. So that's why we talk about color contrast ratio. So there are guidelines available to support us in designing accessible content. And ideally, of course, we should always try to follow these guidelines. But often this is not possible due to existing branding guidelines or color conventions. And one of these color conventions that we use is RAG, which is using red, amber, and green to report on progress, performance, or statuses. But the most common type of color blindness is red-green color blindness, which makes it quite difficult for those individuals to distinguish those two colors. So if you see here, I created another simulation. The two in the middle are for red and green color blindness. And it's very confusing or even unusable. So if you have to make decision based on these two images in the center, it's going to be very difficult to say what's happening. Additionally, if you work with Power BI, you probably know that Power BI only allow you to use one theme selected. You cannot have two different themes. And often what happens is our reports lack in color accessibility. So I mentioned that there are guidelines to help us build an accessible content. So that's what we're going to talk about now. Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or for short, WCAG, are globally recognized standards designed to make digital content accessible to people with disabilities. And it was developed by the World Wide Web Consortium. WCAG 2.2 is the most recent version. It's been officially in use since October 2023. WCAG version 3.0, there is already a draft available. You can find on their website as well, although I don't know when it's going to be the official version. So in the current version, there are 13 guidelines across 4 principles, which are known as POUR, and there are in total 87 success criteria. There are different levels of compliance. We have level A, AA, and AAA, where AA is the most commonly mandated. So let's understand what is the criteria known as POUR. So POUR stands for first, perceivable, where users can recognize and use the services and tools with sensors available based on one of the sensors available for them. And that means, for example, through the use of alternative text for non-text elements and captions for videos. Next one is operable, where the user interface components and navigation must be operable. So all functionalities must be available from a keyboard and must provide users enough time to read and use the content. Next, we have understandable, where the information and the operation of user interface must be understandable. And this involves making text readable and comprehensible, ensuring that the user interface appears in predictable ways, and also by helping the users to avoid and correct mistakes. And finally, we have robust, where the content must be robust enough to be interpreted in a reliable way by assistive technologies such as screen readers. In terms of the levels of compliance that I mentioned, level A, AA, and AAA, these levels represent different degrees of accessibility that digital content should meet. Level A will address the most basic features, so it's the one that we should try not to aim for level A. Level AA addresses the most common barriers, aiming to make content accessible to a wider range. And level AAA addresses the highest level of accessibility, providing the most inclusive experience. So in terms the use of color, the principle perceivable has a guideline about making content distinguishable. And distinguishable means make it easier for users to see and hear content, including separating foreground from background. And then we have the success criteria on the use of color that defines the color contrast required for the different levels of compliance. And the intent of these success criteria is to provide enough contrast between text and background so it can be read without by people with low vision or impaired contrast perception without the use of contrast enhancing assistive technology. So even though we have high contrast mode, these criteria has to be achieved without the use of that high contrast mode, for example. And here we have the thresholds. So if you have body text, level of compliance AA requires a color contrast ratio of 4:1, while level AAA, which is the highest level, requires a contrast ratio of 7:1. And body text means anything up to 17 points, and if in bold, only up to 13. And if you have large scale text, which is above 18 points, or if in bold, above 14 points, level AA requires a contrast ratio of 3:1, while level AAA requires 4.5:1. And there is also the contrast ratio for non-text elements, any icons or graphics that we use. The contrast ratio should, against the background should be 3:1, and level AAA does not specify, which means we should always aim for at least 3.1. There are some exceptions, so if you have any decorative text as well, or decorative images, as well as logo type. So whenever you see something like this is not good, this is not okay. I often scroll through data visualization challenge on LinkedIn, and it's very common to see people using a really, really bad contrast ratio. So we have to understand, even if you think it looks amazing, we don't design for ourselves, we design for an audience. We have to consider that different, not only levels of abilities or technical knowledge, but as well as circumstances. If you have a display with poor resolution or low lighting conditions, you may not be able to get the most of a page or a report that has a very bad contrast ratio. So in terms of color contrast calculation, there are two main approaches. There is the approach used by WCAG 2.2, and there is also another approach that is called Accessible Perceptual Contrast Algorithm, or also known as AP. So WCAG criteria uses the formula based on the relative luminescence to calculate the contrast ratio. And this is calculated by comparing the luminescence of the text color against the luminescence of the background color. And the advantage is because it's simple and consistent. And the disadvantage is it is less accurate in reflecting human perception, especially for very light or dark colors. And as well, it doesn't consider text context, like the weight or the type of font. And then we have APCA. So APCA is a newer method that aims to better match the human visual perception. I'm not going to dare to show the formula here because it's a more complex formula, but that takes into consideration factors such as the size, the weight, as well as the specific color used. I've seen some similar color contrast calculators using APCA that you can even select the font type. And it is designed to provide a more accurate measure of how readable text is against a background. The disadvantage is it is a more complex method, and it may require workflow updates. So if you already have everything set up using the relative luminescence method, you're going to have to redo it all, because sometimes it is considered a good contrast ratio using the relative luminescence, but it's not within the APCA. Power BI enables us to create more accessible reports through its built-in accessibility features. Some of these features we don't need to configure at all. And although we don't need to configure as developers, I would highly recommend letting your users know that these features are available. So the first one is keyboard navigation and screen reader compatibility. So every object in Power BI that has keyboard navigation is also compatible for screen reader. So it is by default, you don't need to do anything about it. And then we have high contrast color views. So Power BI desktop automatically detects which high contrast theme is being used in Windows, and it applies those settings. And in Power BI service also attempts to detect the high contrast setting selected for Windows, while also provide you the option to manually select which high contrast color you want to use. Next one is the option Show Data Table, where users can view the data in a visual, so any visual, in a tabular format. And that can be by selecting the three dots and going to this option here, Show Data Table, or by using the shortcut in your keyboard shortcut, Alt-Shift F11. And this is what happens. So the visual goes on the top, and there is a little table underneath, which is also compatible as a screen reader. Next one is focus mode. Sorry, it's a bit moved around. This is quite supposed to be here, where you have this little icon. And when we click on that, the visual fills up the whole page. So you can focus on that specific visual if you don't want to be distracted by everything else on the page. And that's very easy to click back to the report, and you go back to the report. Now, Power BI also has some features that require configuration from us, from developers. One of them is alternative text. So if you remember, I said that Power BI is compatible by default with screen readers, yes, but it will only work properly if we add alternative text for any non-text elements. And that includes our charts, our graphics. So we can manually type in the alternative text in the box, and that will give a limit of 250 characters. But we also can create a DAX and add this conditional formatting, and that can be flexible if you have slices or user filters on your page. You can create a dynamic alternative text for that. And when we use DAX, there is no limit in how many characters we can use. And the next one is tab order. And tab order is really important, not only for screen readers, because it shows tab order is the order that you move across the visuals by using the tab key. And it has to match the order that our users are intended to consume the report. So we have always to open this pane. So don't confuse tab order with layer order. Layer order is how the elements stack on each other, and tab order is here. And we sometimes, depending on how you design your report, it's going to be in the right order. Most of the times it's not. So we have to click into one of them and move the arrows up and down so they are in the correct order. Next, we have the use of titles and labels. It's very tempting to remove titles and labels because we want to have a clean look. There are amazing tutorials that force us to remove titles and everything, but unfortunately titles are important accessibility features. And it's not only by having a title, but the titles and labels that have to be meaningful. And finally, we have markers. So we should avoid using color as the only way of conveying information. So there are some charts that allow us to use additional ways, which, for example, in line charts, we can add different markers. We can also change line style. So we can have, for example, a dashed line and a solid line. In some other visuals, we can also add icons additionally to color. Power BI also offers accessible themes, and that is amazing, but we have to be very careful because using one of these accessible themes does not mean necessarily you're not going to face any color accessibility issues. So I actually created a color blindness simulation for I randomly picked two themes, and this is the color blindness simulation. So you can see here, for example, the first three, they look the same, and that happens with other colors across as well. And the same happened to another theme. So what means is we can use them. We just have to make sure that the colors that are used together if they have accessibility issues, we have to think, can I select other color, or can I add an alternative way to my users to understand that these are two different things? So there are tools available online so I'm going to show you shortly one tool that we can use to run color blindness simulation as well as to calculate the contrast ratio. And if you have, sometimes you have employee groups, here in the UK it's quite common that you can try to get user testing, so real users to test, which also is a good option. If you want to learn a little bit more about accessibility in Power BI, so there is a recorded session delivered by Valerie, and it is very junk, which is designed for accessibility, Microsoft, which was in a user group as well. And there is a recording on YouTube. There is also Elena Drakulewska. She created the Power BI accessibility checklist on her blog. That checklist is really good. If you feel that you can't remember everything, it's definitely worth having a look. And Microsoft Learn documentation also has got a really good overview of accessibility in Power BI, so it's worth checking it. So if you remember, I told you a story about having these incidents with a stakeholder. So I created here this very simple dashboard. There is nothing fancy. But if you look here, the stacked column chart, it was the same visual that I created with the same colors. And for 6 months, he didn't tell me that he was colorblind. And he kept asking me updates, which really annoyed me at the time. And now after a while, he actually told me that he was colorblind and he couldn't see the difference. And believe me, I think it was one of the worst experiences I had in my career. And now I'm going to run you a simulation, a colorblindness simulation, so we can try to see what he actually saw when he opened the report. So here we have a simulation for green color blindness. And you can see here that the bar chart, I wouldn't know what is good, what is bad. The next one is for red color blindness, which again, it's very difficult to say what's good and what's bad in here. There is no legend to say. Even you can see it's 3 different colors. If you don't know what they mean, it can be quite challenging. And the same happens for blue color blindness. Again, you see 3 different colors, but what each one of those colors mean. So I would definitely recommend spending some time choosing what colors we're going to use before we even start building our data visualizations. And there are some problematic combinations. And these are, for example, using red and green together, green and brown, blue and purple, light green and yellow, blue and gray, and green and gray. So you can, if you already have your colors, you can run a simulation. If you're not sure which shade of green and red, run a simulation and see what has issues for those individuals who are colorblind. If you have to start choosing colors from zero, you don't have a color palette, I would definitely recommend selecting 2 colors in opposite sides of the color wheel. Of course, avoiding the problematic combinations, because you can see here the red and green are in opposite sides of the color wheel, but it's considered a problematic combination. So I usually select like a navy, dark blue, and orange to get started. And that's now what we're going to look into, how we can select some accessible colors. I'm trying to. So this is the tool that I use. So it is Adobe Color, and they have accessibility tools available. And this is free to use. And the tool we can see here that you can select colorblind safe, or you can also have a look at the color contrast checker. And how it works, you can enter your hex code on the top here. And underneath, you're going to see the simulation. So for each one of the, so red, green, and blue color blindness. And ideally, in each one of the rows, shouldn't have any conflict. So I have here 1 red and green. They look the same. And if you look here, there is here even a warning, possible conflict found. And there are different ways we can address it. We can, I don't know, adjust here, right? We can move things around here. And we can do that. You can even select the color mode. You can select whichever color mode you prefer. I prefer working with RGB. And then you can see what is causing accessibility issues. And it can take a while. It can only allow you to do 5 colors at a time. I would highly recommend not using more than 5 colors anyway. And then that's how I got to this. You can see here these navy, orange, and lilac. these three colors, they have good contrast in these three types of color blindness. And these were the colors that I selected as alternative colors to rag colors to create visualizations. And after I selected these colors, I thought, well, I need to add a data label. So I need to add text on the top of that color. What color should my text be? And for that, let me just copy these hex codes. For that, I go to the contrast checker. And I know that my background color is this blue. And then you can just try to move around here to see what is the best color. You can also pick here, or you can manually type in whatever hex code you want. So I actually, for this blue, I used white. So let me show you now the other colors. So let me move on. So these are the selection. For the alternative, the standard was supposed to be red. I picked this orange and I tagged that color for poor performance. What was amber, I select lilac and I tag that color as needs improvement. And then for good performance, I select this navy and I tag that color as good performance. And now I'm going to show you, now we have a demo of what I actually implemented for a client work, which was a solution. So this client work was different from this bad experience I had, but we had a page with a heat map, what was using red, amber, and green. And I decided to implement a toggle button where the users could toggle between the standard view, which used the rag colors, and the accessible view, which use accessible color, so accessible color combinations. And that's what I'm going to show you. So this is the solution. This is a toggle button that I mentioned. I would be able to toggle between the two different modes. And these methods involve some duplication because I had to use bookmarks, because this type of stack column chart does not allow me to add conditional formatting for the color. Otherwise, I would have used that method. But that specific example, I wouldn't be able to. So what I did, we have to create bookmarks. So what I've done here, I duplicated already the visuals that I'm going to have with the standard and with the accessible color. And I already have my legend here. So let's start by creating the bookmark. So first, I'm going to hide the elements for my accessible view. So I have now only my standard view. And I will add a bookmark. And I'm going to name that bookmark Demo Standard. Next, I will hide the standard. And I'm going to show the accessible mode. And I will add another bookmark, which I'm not going to rename now because of the next step. So the next step is inserting a button, navigator, so a bookmark navigator. And that bookmark navigator is going to add all the bookmarks you have on your report. So to understand the next step, we have to think, okay, we have a toggle button. What is the toggle button doing? So when the toggle button is unselected, I want to have my standard view. And when it is selected, so when I toggle it, I need to see my accessible view. So to get to that, we need to click on our bookmark navigator. We click on the bookmark that we want to group, which is the one that when we toggle that we want to see, and we group. So we group it. And then the next step, we have to go to the bookmark format pane. And the first change we have to do is on the bookmark, we have to, let me just, rename now. So we have created, so this is the accessible one. Let's just rename, which will be demo. That's such a way back. So whenever I toggle, I want to see the accessible and allow the selection, because when I toggle off, I'm going to launch on this selection and I'm going to launch the demo view. It's looking slightly better. But now I have written bookmark 4. I don't want that. I want to have a circle in the middle. So to do that, I can rename under the group that we call demo accessible. And there are different ways of doing that. I simply call the emoji keyboard. So if I press the Windows key and period, it's going to bring the emoji keyboard. And I'm going to select this image here. So it already looks a bit better, but it's still not quite a toggle button. So the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change the shape So my shape, I want it to be around a rectangle, and I want it to be like a pill. So it's going to be a 50% rounded corners. I can just make it slightly smaller. And then the next we have to think is when we unselect, so by the default method, our circle has to be on the left. So if I go to style, applying settings to I want first default, my horizontal alignment is on the left. And then my fill, I want it white. Let me select a different color for the border. I'm going to put 2 points. There we go. Next, I want to format when it's selected, where the toggle button has to be on the left. So if I go here back to style, apply settings to selected, I want the horizontal alignment to be on the left, my fill color to be blue. Yeah, happy with that. And now when I toggle off, I'm going to have a view of my standard view. And when I toggle on, all the elements they're supposed to have the accessible color combinations appear. And I run a color blindness simulation for this accessible view. So the first one we can see here, green color blindness, we can see the 3 different colors, and we know what each one of those colors mean. The same happened for red color blindness, and the same happened for blue color blindness. I put a QR code there because I actually have a demo showing how to build this toggle button if you wish to watch it on your own time. So that is the video that's on YouTube. Let's wrap up the session now. So consider that's the most important message from this session. Consider the contrast ratio between text and any background colors, and that we should at least get to level of compliance AA and aim for 4.5 to 1 for text. So rule of thumb, if you have dark background, use light colors, and if you have a light background, use dark colors. So as you can see here on the light background and on the dark background. Use color blindness simulation tools if you're not sure if your color combinations will work for users who may be colorblind. Avoid using color as the only way of conveying information. So if you have alternative ways like adding icons, if you have a line chart, if you have a bar chart, it may be difficult, but then you can select accessible color combinations. And please note that there are other types of disabilities and impairments, and refer to Microsoft documentation to ensure that our report is truly accessible. Thank you very much for listening. Now, if you have any questions.
Yeah, there are no questions in the chat yet. There's been a lot of chat going back and forth on specifically on links and what the entities use. There's a link by Stephen where it's a different tool where you can import screenshots and do some simulations. I think maybe there's a question coming along, but until then, is there any way in Power BI where you can easily simulate this? Is there any tool within the product from Microsoft that does this, or
I never seen, but I use a custom visual once that was synoptical panel. That's when I first saw the option. You can actually select each one of the type of color blindness and simulate. What I do, if what I have on my page is not sensitive, if it's client data, I wouldn't put any screenshot of any image. But there is another website that I also found, it's Cobblies, and I upload the image and it actually shows different degrees of color blindness as well. But I would just be mindful if you have data that you can't share publicly.
So you mentioned some of the pitfalls that we all stumble across, but are there any more common mistakes or misconceptions that you see in organizations, attempting to address color blindness?
I've never seen a company trying to address specifically color blindness because it's not even a legal requirement. So, but what I've seen, for example, the company I work for, in our branding guidelines, there is a page talking about if you need double level of compliance, AA or AAA. So it gives me that, and I can see whatever the colors are there and then copy and paste. I also work in companies that they didn't care, and the branding colors were horrific. That if you use them together will cause a lot of trouble. And I heard from employees from that company that yes, we have problem seeing these colors. So I think it is a mindset that the employers, the branding team will have to sit down and think, okay, we have these pretty color combinations. Are they functional for everybody? Because not even if you have clients, it is like our own people, right? We have to give them the right support for them to thrive. And it starts something very basics, which is the colors that we use in the organization.
Yep. So there's a couple of comments in the chat. Some about in a country where all government publications have to be converted to be accessible, including charts and so on. I'm not aware of that requirement in Denmark, but I know there is some work going on.
So the EU now, are you on the EU?
Yes.
So all the countries now in the European Union, so the deadline was late June. If you have any website, they have to comply now. It used to be just government. So here in the UK now, it's still only for the government. So if we have any contract with government, because Power BI is in a web browser, it has to be accessible.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for dedicating your time and expertise to today's session. There were some clear, crisp explanations and also some really good hands-on tips on how to get the discussion going and applying some of the knowledge that you shared. I think even though it was a diminished audience today, everybody was commenting great stuff in the chat and just sending out a good vibe. So thank you very much for having being on the show and taking your time to prepare and do this.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I really hope that people find these, we're going to go back and think about when we're using colors. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Cheers, bye.
Bye-bye.